So all good? So we're looking at different government actions in markets. We'll do price ceiling and price floor really quickly because they're not that difficult. What is a price ceiling? A price ceiling is a legal maximum price. Usually, what would the intention of a price ceiling be? Usually the government would impose a price ceiling because they want to benefit consumers, right? They feel that for whatever reason, the current equilibrium price is too high. So the government passes a law stating that there is a new legal maximum price. Usually a price ceiling would be enacted below the current equilibrium price. So let's say the government passes a law that the price ceiling is $10 for this product, which means it's illegal to sell this product above $10. You can have a price ceiling above the maximum the current market price. You can have a price ceiling above the current market price, but that would be a non-binding price ceiling. Because if the maximum legal price was above the market price, well, the market is not violating the law to begin with, so it's a non-binding or ineffective price ceiling. So usually a price ceiling would be enacted below the market price. The quantity demanded rises, the quantity supplied falls. Random numbers. Even though 110 units are being demanded, only 80 units are being supplied. Therefore, the quantity traded is 80, which is the smaller number. Because consumers can only buy whatever is available for sale. I hope you're writing notes as well. I know I'm doing a lot of drawing, but you have to explain in words in the exam. It's just a bit harder for me to keep writing sentences, yeah? So the quantity traded is the smaller number here. So we ignore everything on the right-hand side, because we don't go past 80. So everything behind this piece of paper is called a what? If we don't get any area behind the paper, it is called a something we miss out, we don't get. Actually, let's do it the other way around. Let's talk about consumer surplus and producer surplus first then. Consumer surplus is defined as what are consumers willing and able to pay, and you minus what they actually pay. Which curve denotes willingness and ability to pay? Demand. Very good, you said demand, not demand. How much do consumers actually pay? 10. The difference between how much they're willing and able to pay and actually pay is consumer surplus. So that area represents consumer surplus. Producer surplus, how much do producers actually sell for, minus how much they are willing and able to sell for. How much do they actually sell for? 10. What curve denotes willing and able to sell? Supply. So that area represents producer surplus. So everything that we don't get, the area we miss out on is our famous deadweight loss. Everything we miss out on is deadweight loss. I'll move on to price flow very quickly so we have more time for taxes and subsidies, which are a bit harder. So, price flow is the opposite of a price ceiling. A price ceiling is a legal maximum price. So a price floor is a legal minimum price. Usually a price floor would be enacted to benefit who? Sellers, because you're guaranteeing them a minimum price. So let's say, same numbers as before, the market price is 15, the market quantity is 100, and the government passes a law that the price floor is 20. I'll just erase this side. So the government passes a law that the price floor is 20. It's illegal to sell below 20. Quantity supplied rises. Random number. Quantity demanded falls. Random number. How many units get traded, bought and sold? Even though there's 123 available for sale, we can only buy, we only want to buy 87, right? So this is our quantity traded. You can make a note that the quantity traded is always the smaller number. Applying the same definitions. So because we, have a look at this please. Because we don't go past 87, that quantity, we ignore everything on the right, yeah? We don't look at whatever happens after that. So we ignore that and apply our definitions. Very quickly, consumer surplus, willing and able to pay minus actually pay. Producer surplus, willing and able to sell minus actually sell. Sell for, and the triangle no one gets is called our deadweight loss. Okay. That's easy stuff, so let's quickly go to tax and subsidies so we can spend a bit more time on that. So, with taxes and subsidies, you can impose them on the buyer or the seller. Let's start with sellers. The party the tax is imposed on, that's the curve that's going to shift. So, in the exam, look at the question carefully. See who the tax or the subsidy is imposed on, and that's the curve you need to shift. Let's say the tax is $10 per unit. Who is the tax imposed on? Sellers. That means which curve has to shift? Supply has to shift. With taxes and subsidies, we say that the curves shift up, down, or left to right. When you have the dollars, up, down, okay? Because it's dollars. I mean, diagrammatically, it's the same as left, right. but it's actually easier for you when you do the rest of the question if you think about it as up, down. Think of it like this as well. Supply is marginal cost. Demand is marginal benefit. What will a tax do to the firm's marginal cost? Increase. So the marginal cost curve will shift up. By how much? By $10. Yeah? So it's better to think of it as up, down, rather than left, right. It will shift up by $10. The curve will shift up by $10. That does not mean the new price is 25. Can you see that? Is 25 the new price? No. So one of the keys in micro is about, just because the tax is $10 and the price used to be 15, it does not mean the new price is the old price plus the tax. You can't just increase the price by the amount of the tax, because if the price goes up, the quantity demanded will go down. Consumers are not going to keep buying 100 units, right? Think about it. If the government decided to tax university seats, if they say all university students have to pay a $2,000 tax, we can't just increase the fees by $2,000, because when the price goes up, less students will enroll anyway. So we'll have to increase the price, yes, but not the full amount. Okay? You can't increase the price by the full amount, so key, don't just add, look at the new equilibrium. So don't just go E1 plus tax, you look at the new equilibrium. So actually we can't figure out how much E2 is. But E2 is definitely between 25 and 15. Okay? So some number between 25 and 15. Yes?
So in an exam you just write the new prices between 25 and 15? Or would you
just put a number.
Okay.
19, whatever. Okay? And if it's a written question with words, you can say the new price is between 25 and 15. I'm going to assume 19. Okay? In second year micro, we'll give you fancy equations, and then you can actually calculate it. But you'll do that when you choose it as your second year elective. Yeah? Don't you want to calculate it exactly? Yeah? So for now, just the concept. In second year, with proper algebra and equations, you can work it out. Okay, so if you walk into the store, how much would you pay? 19, right? So you walk into the store, the consumer would pay 19. Does the producer get to keep 19? Because the tax is how much? 10. So once the consumer pays 19, the producer has to give $10 to the government. So the producer will now surrender $10 to the government, and now the producer is left with how many dollars? 9. So now the producer just receives $9. How much have you effectively lost as a consumer? Here you compare before and after the tax. What did the consumer pay before the tax? 15. If this was you and you were a consumer, sorry, I've drawn a boy. If this was you and you were the consumer, you would give $15 to the store, and they can keep 15, right? After the tax, how much do you pay? When you walk into the store, you would pay 19. Can the store keep the entire 19? No. They've got to give $10 to the government. So how much is the store left with? Only 9. How much have you lost as a consumer? You have lost $4. How much has the producer lost? 6. How much has the government gained? 10. Who did the government actually impose the tax on? The government asked the seller to pay the tax, yeah? But then what did the seller do? They pass some of it to the consumer. Could they pass all of it? No. Yeah, they pass some of it, but not all of it. So in the end, the tax is actually shared. Okay, shifted to some of it to the consumer. Yeah. So the tax is actually shared. Just so you can conclude, even though it's imposed on the producer, the actual burden is on both. Yes?
9 and 25 become the price floor and ceiling?
No. Different topic. Taxes. So 19 is what the consumer pays. They walk into the store. They give $19 to the producer. The producer then has to use 10 of these $19 to pay the government, and then they keep the 9. Okay? So we call the -4 consumer burden, and we call the -6, guess, producer burden. You can't increase the price by the amount of the tax because the quantity will not remain at 100. When the price goes up, the quantity will go down. So you can't pass on all the tax to the consumer. Yeah? You could pass all the tax to the consumer if the demand curve was vertical. If the demand curve was vertical, can you see where the black line intersects the pink? If the demand curve was vertical, then the new equilibrium price would be 25. So if demand was perfectly what? Inelastic or elastic? If demand was perfectly inelastic, that means the consumer is not sensitive to the price, then you could pass all of the tax to the consumer. But that's something like a heart medication, a drug for diabetes. If you have diabetes, you have to buy that product, otherwise you will die. You have to buy that product in a certain quantity. You can't buy more, you can't buy less. Just imagine the government taxing heart medication. That'd be pretty cruel, right? And they'll never get re-elected again. So it's not really going to happen.
What about train fares?
Are train fares perfectly inelastic? Would you always catch the train?
Well, in some cases, if you live in like a fairly rural area where you could only get
then you should hope the government does not tax you. Yeah. So yeah. Sure. So, I mean, it'll be close to vertical, not vertical, right? I mean, if the train fare was that high, you might search for a different job. You might decide maybe going to work, the marginal benefit doesn't outweigh the marginal cost. You might sleep. You might study. You might relocate. So yeah, it could be close to vertical, but not. Unless you're addicted to the train. Yeah. So, you can add, the size of your share depends on the elasticity, i.e. the slope. The size of the share that you pay depends on the elasticity, depends on the slope. I'll show you what I mean. If I redraw this diagram again with the same supply curve, so I'm just replicating the diagram here with the same supply curve and the same tax. But what if I draw the demand curve really steep? Look at E1 and E2. Is there a huge or small change in price? It's quite a big change in price, right? The demand curve is quite steep, so the price is quite close to 25. We could say 24, for example. If the tax is 10, the increase in price is quite large. So you can say when the elasticity of demand goes down, the consumer burden goes up. What about the change in quantity? Quite big or quite small? It's quite a tiny change in quantity. It's almost the original quantity. Quite close to the original quantity. Very small change in quantity. So, the consumer pays 24. What does the producer get to keep? 24 minus 10. The producer gets to keep 14. How big is the consumer burden? $9. Because the price has gone up by 9. How big is the producer burden? $1. 9 plus 1. 9 plus 1. 10. Everyone say wow. Everyone say wow. Everyone say wow. Amazing, isn't it? Yeah. Who did the government impose it on? Producer. Who actually pays the tax? Both. In this case, mostly the consumer, because the elasticity is quite low. Is that okay? So, when the demand curve is quite inelastic, the consumer burden goes up. Then the other thing to see is, what if the supply curve is quite steep? What if your supply curve is really steep? Who do you think the burden will be on now? Let us see. Do you want to see? Say yes. So if I shift the supply curve up, S2, let's see. So always look at E2, right? Taxes and subsidies, look at the new equilibrium. So quickly grab a pen and mark E2. Don't dwell on anything else. Has the price changed by much? Hardly, right? There's hardly a change in price. Let's say 16. So do consumers really even notice much of the tax? No. So even though consumers pay 16, after surrendering $10 to the government, producers are left with 6. The producer burden is huge here. The producer burden is actually $9. So, conclusion, when the elasticity of supply goes down, the producer burden goes up.
Would this be like cigarettes, or are they just trying to recover it like every year, like raising the prices a little bit? Because most of the taxes on the producer, right? Cigarettes.
Ooh, cigarettes, petrol, alcohol. More supply is inelastic or demand is inelastic? Demand, yeah. Consumers who buy it possibly are addicted to it. So taxes on cigarettes, alcohol and petrol, which are the only products that have these extra taxes in Australia. The taxes on the seller, because it's easier for the government to collect it from the seller. What does the seller do? They pass on most of it to the buyer, the consumer.
But I mean, in that instance, so most of the tax lies on the seller, but the consumer still sees an increase. And like with cigarettes, every couple of months there'll be a gradual increase. So I was wondering if the taxes maybe.
The government does keep readjusting the tax every budget. I don't know if that's what you're referring to. And there could obviously be demand shocks as well. Well, demand shifts to the right, the price would also go up. But the idea is impose the tax on the seller passes most of it to the buyer. So it makes sense for the government because politically, not everyone knows this graph, right? The day-to-day person on the street thinks, yeah, the cigarette company is paying the tax. Not me, but really you are. Because the price has gone up quite a bit. It's also good for the government because the change in quantity is quite small, which means the government actually collects a lot of revenue since there's only a small change in the quantity. So it makes sense for the government to impose taxes on inelastic products which have relatively inelastic demand. Small change in quantity, the government raises most of the revenue. It's on the seller passes most of it to the buyer. Okay, subsidies. Again, you can have subsidies on the seller. For the seller, you can have subsidies for the buyer. Again, the key in the exam is see who the subsidy is on. Is 4. That's the curve that has to shift. So if it's for sellers, you shift supply. If it's for buyers, you shift demand. Random numbers. Actually, same numbers as before. So let's say the subsidy is $10 per unit sold. Which curve shifts? Supply. Supply is marginal cost. Demand is marginal benefit. Giving a subsidy to the seller would increase or decrease the marginal cost? Decrease. So the supply curve, the marginal cost curve will shift down by 10. Does that mean the new price is $5? Can I say the new price is 15 minus 10? No, you never do that with taxes and subsidies. You always look at E2. Will the quantity remain the same? When the price goes down, the quantity demanded will go, random number. The new price is less than 15, but more than 5. That's 15 minus 10 is 5. So the new price is somewhere between 15 and 5. Let's say 12. Okay? So, I walk into a store, how much would I pay? If I'm the consumer, I walk into a store, how much would I pay? 12, right? After the subsidy. I walk into the store and I would pay 12. Is that all the seller receives? Because the seller is also going to get $10 from the government. So they receive 12 from me, but they also get $10 from the government. So how much does the seller get all up? 22. How much did I pay as a consumer? 12. So, even though the consumer pays 12, even though 12 is all the consumer pays, the seller gets a further $10 from the government. So what does the seller effectively receive? 22. Producer receives 22. Who did the government give the subsidy to? The seller. Who actually benefits from the subsidy? Both. Just like a tax. A subsidy is a negative tax. If a tax ends up being shared, a subsidy will also end up being shared. How much does the consumer benefit here? Because they used to pay 15, now they pay 12, so their benefit is 3. What is the producer's benefit? They used to get 15, now they get 22, 7. How much does the government pay in subsidy? In subsidies? 10. The government is paying 10, but the benefit to the seller, but the benefit actually ends up being shared. Again, the size of the share depends on elasticity of demand and elasticity of supply. The same principles as for a tax. Yeah? The size of the share depends on the slope, i.e. elasticity of supply, elasticity of demand. Something we forgot to mention for taxes. Because the subsidy has resulted in over or underproduction. The subsidy is causing overproduction, so our deadweight loss is this triangle on the right. That triangle is the deadweight loss. Subsidies result in overproduction, so the deadweight loss is on the right. Taxes result in over or underproduction here. It's causing production to go down, so the deadweight loss here is on the left. So both taxes and subsidies will create deadweight loss. Who gets this rectangle for taxes? The government. Who gets the top triangle? That top triangle is known as what? The top triangle is consumer surplus. And the bottom triangle is producer surplus. That's for a tax. It's actually a little bit harder for a subsidy. What's the definition of consumer surplus again?
The amount that the buyer pays less the amount they're willing to pay.
Yeah, so how much they are willing and able to pay minus how much they actually pay. So, this is probably the hardest part. Consumer surplus and producer surplus for subsidies is actually a bit tricky. How much does the buyer actually pay? They actually pay 12. Agree? With the subsidy, the new price is 12, so the buyer actually pays 12. Which curve is willing and able to pay? Willing and able to pay is the definition of demand. So that triangle represents consumer surplus. Agree? Willing and able to pay, that's the demand curve. Actually pay, that's the new price, 12. Now, this is where it gets tricky. How do you define producer surplus? How much do sellers actually receive minus how much they were willing and able to receive? How much do sellers actually receive? 22. Which curve is willing and able to receive? Supply. They overlap.
Is that in the exam? I don't know any 3 5 something that we know.
There's a minimum 3-color rule for a reason. So, dun, 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 they overlap. Oh, look at that. It's smudging. Look at the pink getting bigger. Ooh. Ugly. Oh, pretty. So they overlap, right? A, E212 is the consumer surplus. B, C22 is the producer surplus. So they overlap. That happens with subsidies. Because unlike tax, where you remove the $10, here the $10 is coming from somewhere else. So it ends up overlapping. With tax, you just take the $10 out of the price, but here it's $10 in addition.
So in the exam, should we label each one a letter?
No, that's fine. You can shade the area. I mean, if you do letters, it's fine too. So whichever you like.
Can you repeat letters?
Yeah, let's do it again. Actually, let's put letters everywhere. Let's go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. Okay. You're going to miss this, aren't you? This is why we're having workshops after the exam. Have you heard about that? We're having workshops after the exam. Because after drawing all these graphs, your body might go into shock if you suddenly stop drawing them. So just to ease you out of the work economics, we're having workshops. So just come to a few after the exam, maybe 3 a week. Then about the week later come to about 2. And then maybe come to about 1. Just get your system, ease your way out of economics. Otherwise you'll have withdrawal symptoms. Okay, let's start again. Consumer surplus is willing and able to pay minus actually pay. How much do consumers actually pay? 12, which is GI, right? Consumers will actually pay GI. What curve is willing and able to pay? Demand. So that triangle is consumer surplus. How much do producers actually receive? 22, which is BD. So producers actually receive BD. What curve denotes willing and able? Supply. So that triangle denotes producer surplus. So they overlap. All good? Here's something more exciting. Let's say subsidy for sellers. Let's say the quantity is 100 and the price is 15. Let's say the subsidy is $25 per unit. Now what will happen? The supply curve is going to shift so much that you are now going to there's going to be such a massive shift in supply it's going to shift by a large amount that the price could actually be as, sorry, your name again? Adam. Debbie, Debbie. Very good. 1,400 students. I know Adam. The price has gone so low that the price is now actually what? Below 0. So, random number, let's say -2. So, how much does the consumer pay now? The consumer pays -2. What does that mean? The seller gives me $2 to buy the product from them. Yeah? So I walk into a store and I say, can I buy that highlighter? Say yes. And then you give me $2 to buy the highlighter from her, right? So she is paying me to buy the product from her. Because even though she gives me $2, she is not worried about the negative price. The seller is more concerned about the subsidy. The government is going to give her how much subsidy? $25. So even though the seller has paid the consumer $2 to buy the product off them, the consumer has paid a negative price. The seller is not concerned about that as such. They know they're going to get $25 from the government.
Are there any situations like that, or is that just hypothetical?
You're asking the wrong question. I will not answer. Like I said, I won't answer.
Things a couple of years ago.
No, so it's like the wind farms in Texas, like they produce too much electricity, but then like they can't send it to people because they're an island or something like that. So then they pay their customers to take it. Like it went down to like -$8 or something like that. And then the subsidy comes from the government, so they still earn money. So they just need to get rid of the electricity.
So there are lots of examples of this, yes. So, that doesn't have to intersect. That's why I put the liquid paper there. So, the consumer gets paid $2 to buy it off the seller. The seller gets -2 from the consumer, but they get $25 from the government. So how much does the seller get to keep? 23. Is the seller better off? Because they used to get 15, now they get 23. What's the producer's benefit? The producer benefit is $8 plus 8. What is the consumer's benefit? The consumer used to pay 15, now they pay -2, so their benefit is 17. How much is the government losing? 25. Yeah? So this is an extreme case which can happen if the subsidy is so large that it drives the price to a negative region. The consumer gets paid by the seller to buy it off them, because the seller is thinking, well, okay, I'll pay them to buy it off me, but I'm going to get more than compensated by the government. Net, I am going to be better off compared to before, rather than just charging the old 115. Yeah. So the key is, at the end of the day, even with the negative price, the subsidy ends up being shared. Yeah? The principle stays the same like with tax. Just because it's on the seller doesn't mean the seller is the only one that benefits from the subsidy. Just because it's on the seller doesn't mean the seller has to pay the tax. Whether it's a tax, whether it's a subsidy, whether it's on the seller, whether it's on the buyer, it always ends up being shared. And the size of the share depends on the elasticity of demand and elasticity of supply. The producer burden goes up when supply becomes relatively inelastic. The consumer burden goes up when demand becomes relatively inelastic. Sounds good? Happy? If you're happy and you know it,